Those who have been to a ruined wedding. What happened? Story 1. Things were going fine until the reception. We were all just settling in, enjoying the food, when suddenly someone stood up in the back and yelled, "I object to this marriage." It was like a movie scene. Everyone turned, and there he was, her ex-boyfriend, out of nowhere. He wasn't joking or drunk, he was dead serious. He went off on this long rant about how they were meant to be together and how she was making a huge mistake. The bride was mortified, trying to tell him to stop, while the groom was standing there, fuming. It got even worse when the ex got down on one knee and tried to propose to her right in front of everyone. Security had to drag him out, but by then, the whole vibe of the wedding was ruined. The groom stormed off, the bride was in tears, and the rest of us were just awkwardly standing around, not knowing what to do. It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives, but it turned into a nightmare. Story 2. This one still burned in my memory. Everything was going great at the wedding. The ceremony was beautiful, dinner was delicious. But once the open bar kicked in, the bride's uncle got way too drunk. This man turned into a mess, hitting on bridesmaids, making wild jokes that no one found funny, and then during the bride and groom's first dance, he ripped off his shirt and started dancing around them. Everyone was trying to ignore him at first, but when he got in the groom's face and started slurring insults, it was game over. The groom, who had been patient up until this point, finally lost it, and a full-blown shouting match broke out on the dance floor. The bride was screaming at her uncle, who refused to leave, until security had to physically remove him. The whole party vibe just tanked after that. Half the guests left early, and you could just feel the tension in the air. One drunk uncle wrecked the entire night. Story 3. This wedding I went to looked like it came straight out of a magazine. Gorgeous venue, perfect weather, beautiful couple. Then came the cake-cutting disaster. As the bride and groom were about to cut their cake, the table it was sitting on suddenly collapsed. The entire cake, which was this towering multi-tiered masterpiece, crashed to the ground in a heap of frosting and smashed fondant. You could see the bride was barely holding it together, but the groom tried to salvage it by picking up one of the tiers and offering to serve it. It didn't work. The cake was ruined, and so was the mood. The bride eventually broke down in tears, while the staff scrambled to clean up the mess. Apparently the bride had noticed earlier in the day that the table was wobbly and warned the staff, but they didn't do anything about it. The whole night just spiraled into awkward conversations, and a lot of guests quietly slipped out early. Story 4. This didn't happen at a wedding, but at a 30-year wedding anniversary. I was working as a waiter at an inn. We had ballrooms for private parties and other bigger events. The bride and groom had spared no expense. About 100 guests, 5-course meals, an open bar, and a whole-day party. We were supposed to close it at 4 in the morning. It was grand, and one of the biggest parties I had waited on so far. After the main course, the husband stood up and held a speech, a long one. He started out reminiscing of when they had met, their early life together, the hard times they had endured. He then talked at length about how he loved the children she had birthed him, and told each of them how proud he was of them, their character and accomplishments. So far, it was one of the better speeches I had ever heard. It was heartfelt, he had a lot of charisma, he was well-spoken and funny. But then he turned to his wife again. He told her that he had hated her for the last 4 years of their life together, that she was a toxic, narcissistic woman, that had made him feel miserable, and almost had driven him to the edge. He told her that he knew she had a lover, pointed him out in the crowd, next to his wife and children. He had evidence and was suing for divorce, intending to take everything. He gave her the divorce papers right then and there. Then he announced to everyone that he had gotten his own apartment, that movers had moved all his stuff while they were at the party, and that he would be leaving shortly. But everything was already paid for, so they should stay and enjoy themselves. In the stunned silence that ensued, he tipped all the staff, dishwashers, bosses, waiters, and busboys $200 each and left. Needless to say, all except my family left the party within the hour. Story 5. I'm a wedding photographer. I was at one really fancy one a couple of years ago. Typical outdoor deal at a swanky location in the middle of nowhere. The place was really nice, had a large concrete stairway flanked by water fountains that led down to the altar area, so the bride could be seen by all like she was ascending from heaven. The ceremony begins, and the bridal party comes down and takes their places. Then the bride appears with her father. She takes 3 or 4 steps down the concrete steps and her shoe twists on her. She tumbled down a good 12 feet or more and busted out the majority of her front teeth in the fall. So much blood all over her. With the place being so isolated, it took a good 40 minutes for the ambulance to arrive, and she was in intense pain. Ultimately, she was okay, and I got an email from them weeks later with a rescheduled date. This time, there were no stairs anywhere in sight. Story 6. The ceremony was perfect, and everything seemed to be going according to plan, until the maid of honor gave her speech. It started off nice, talking about their long friendship, but then she began oversharing. Like, way too much. She brought up an old high school crush the bride had, made weird comments about how the bride used to hate the idea of marriage, and even told stories about how the bride used to get blackout drunk at parties. It was one cringe-worthy moment after another, and you could see the bride's face getting redder and redder. The groom just sat there, not saying a word, but it was clear he wasn't happy. Eventually, the bride had to step in and cut her friend off before she could do more damage. The rest of the night felt like damage control as people kept trying to lift the mood back up. But it was too late. The maid of honor had already killed the vibe. Story 7. This was one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception. Photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. Bride landed and dislocated her knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee, etc., but she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and threw up down her dress, and had to sit with her mom in another room while everyone else danced, etc. Felt so bad for her, as she spent the rest of the evening crying. Story 8. I was studying photography and used to act as an assistant to a well-known wedding photographer. Went to a couple's wedding. He shot digital, and I shot black and white film. Spent all day with the couple from 9 a.m. through till 2 a.m. the next morning when we left. I could see how genuinely in love they were. It was only a date, but I got to know them quite well and really liked them both. The next morning, I got a call from the photographer and his voice was shaky. He explained that the groom had been murdered that night after the reception party. 3 guys had broken into their bungalow to steal wedding gifts. The groom got out of bed to stop them, and they executed him in front of the bride. I was in shock for about 2 weeks. This story was in South Africa, if that helps explain how or why this happened. The next weekend, the photographer and I went to the bride's house to present her with the photos. We worked together to get the job massively accelerated, so she had the photos of her husband. We did it at our own expense, and didn't charge her a penny for the day or all the prints and album. Sort of the least we could do. Because my photos didn't matter as much, I've been able to simply capture those natural moments between them, rather than stage wedding photos. So they had the normal album pics, but also about 150 snaps of just them being a couple. She was in tears from the moment we arrived till we left a few hours later. She was a shadow of the women I'd met only a week earlier. That thing still haunts me. Story 9. Weirdest wedding I've ever been to. Everything was going fine until the bouquet toss. The bride threw the bouquet, and just as it was about to be caught, some random guy dressed as a clown ran out of nowhere and caught it. No one knew who he wasn't a guest, and he definitely wasn't invited. He started running around the reception hall with the bouquet, honking a horn and laughing like a maniac. Everyone was stunned. The bride and groom didn't know what to do, and neither did the rest of us. Security had to chase him down and physically remove him from the venue, but the damage was done. People were either laughing at the absurdity of it all or too freaked out to stay. The whole wedding turned into a bizarre spectacle, and honestly, no one really knew how to recover from that. Story 10. My best friend's wedding was supposed to be a magical day, but things went sideways real fast. We were in the middle of the reception, everyone having a great time, when suddenly the groom's ex showed up, uninvited of course. She stormed in, wearing a white dress, and headed straight for the happy couple. At first, I thought she was just going to make a scene, but got worse. She grabbed the microphone and started accusing the groom of cheating on my friend with her on the night before the wedding. My heart dropped. My best friend looked like she was about to pass out. Some guests were gasping, others were trying to leave the room. The groom tried to deny it, but the ex had text messages. She read them out loud, and that was it. My friend ripped off her veil, threw her bouquet at the groom, and walked out of the reception hall. Half the guests followed her, and the party ended right there. I'll never forget the look on her face. Story 11. I never imagined my own wedding would turn into a horror story, but it did. The ceremony was perfect, but during the reception, my cousin got way too drunk. We're talking next level embarrassing. He started hitting on everyone, including the bridesmaids, and at one point, tried to start a dance-off with my grandmother. We all thought it was just him being silly, but then he knocked over the entire dessert table while trying to moonwalk. The cake, cupcakes, everything gone. My husband and I were fuming, but we tried to laugh it off and salvage the night. It didn't end there, though. My cousin then decided it was a good idea to strip down to his underwear and jump into the hotel's fountain outside, yelling, "I'm the king of the world." At that point, security had to be called, and the police almost got involved. I was so embarrassed, and now I barely speak to that cousin. My wedding pictures? Yeah, they'd all have him acting like a fool in the background. Story 12. As a wedding photographer, I've seen a lot, but this one still haunts me. It was a beautiful outdoor wedding, perfect golden hour light. Everything was going smoothly until the vows. Just as the bride started to read hers, the groom's phone buzzed. He tried to ignore it, but the buzzing kept going off. The bride was visibly annoyed, but she kept her cool. Then, right in the middle of her emotional speech, the groom pulled out his phone and started texting. The bride stopped, the guests gasped, and I froze behind my camera. Turns out he was texting his side girl, who wasn't at the wedding but was blowing up his phone because she was jealous of the whole situation. The bride took one look at his screen, saw the name, and called off the wedding right then and there. I captured the entire thing on camera, and honestly, it was the most awkward, gut-wrenching moment I've ever experienced. The groom didn't even try to deny it. He just stood there like an idiot, while the bride walked out, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Story 13. This was at a high-end wedding, and I was part of the catering team. Everything was going fine, but then the head chef got into a massive fight with the wedding planner about the timing of the courses. The chef wanted to wait between servings, and the planner insisted everything be rushed to keep the event moving. The chef lost it, stormed into the kitchen, and quit on the spot, leaving half the food uncooked and unserved. We tried to make do without him, but it went downhill fast. Then, to top it all off, one of the servers accidentally spilled an entire tray of lobster tails on the bride's gown. She screamed, started crying, and ran to the bathroom, while the guests just sat there stunned. The worst part? The groom blamed us for ruining the night and refused to pay the catering bill. The whole experience was a nightmare from start to finish, and I still can't believe the chef just walked out like that. Story 14. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. While we were waiting, the air conditioning broke in the venue. It was over 100 degrees outside and humid as heck. The place was overcrowded. You could barely move without bumping into someone else, and in the heat that was extra miserable. I guess the air conditioning problem had also affected the refrigeration or something, because most of the food was spoiled. The only food on the buffet was salad, spaghetti, and rolls. Not enough to feed even half the guests. Most people left after the first dance. 2 of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. Story 15. A coworker was at one of my best friend's weddings. There were very specific rules about the food. No nuts. There were a couple people there, including the maid of honor, who were severely allergic. The venue served something that had nuts. Maid of honor went anaphylactic. EpiPen was not effective, and she took her last breath on the way to the hospital. Needless to say, there are lawsuits abound. Story 16. We attended a wedding for a family member who didn't have a lot of money. It was hosted at an inexpensive venue, but was nice. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt in the couple's face. They came up to our table and asked, "Do you have any friends in the city? We live an hour away." They had all this food for 100 people, but only 30 guests. They were willing to have complete strangers come down just so their money and food wouldn't go to waste. We had not handed over our card with cash inside yet, so my husband hit the ATM and added another $100. Story 17. A friend of my girlfriend was getting married. The wedding was quite normal. They got married in the local church, and then there was the party at a nice restaurant. The photographer asked the bride and her bridesmaids, my girlfriend was one of them, to go outside for some photos. Some minutes later, one of the bridesmaids came back asking for help. There were some swans that attacked the photographer, and the majority of the people around him were not doing anything much more than laughing at this guy who was running around and screaming. Story 18. Big wedding, around 500 people. All the future wife's doing. She wanted the huge $70,000 wedding. I was a groomsman. Pre-wedding, he's nervous as hell. All these people have to be perfect. This is her dream wedding, yada yada. So at some point the whiskey gets pulled out. It went from a calm the nerves few shots to he's just about finished the bottle. We gave him water, got in the shower, and were dressed. It's go time. Midway through her vows, He pukes all down the front of her dress. It was horrible, but it was great. They're going on 8 years strong. Story 19. It was a big wedding, over 300 people. Turns out the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for a little bit, but waited until the wedding to go table to table, letting everyone know the bride was sleeping with her husband. Poor groom was blindsided. Worst part was his father-in-law was well off and opened up a restaurant for him. Well, he lost his wife and his restaurant. Story 20. Not ruined, but marred. My ex-wife's grandmother was in her 90s, in a wheelchair. While we're up at the altar, she won't shut up about the flowers and they might need water. She's not talking quietly to her neighbor. She's yelling in her old lady voice. She didn't have dementia, she was very with it. She had no volume control or what she was doing was inappropriate. She thought the flowers needed water. They looked terrible. She yelled. One of the cousins, without saying anything, got up and started to just wheel her out. Where are we going? She yelled. We all chuckled at Grandma and went on with the ceremony.
That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.